Branded is Alyssa Quart's expose of the advertising initiatives that target teens and an exploration of their consequences. Recently, she was a guest on The Diane Rehm Show, and Book TV cameras joined her in the studio. It's 50 Minutes. Thanks for joining us. I'm Diane Rehm. Each year, billions of dollars are spent by corporations to win over American teenagers. Generation Y has grown up bombarded and defined by name products. Journalist Alyssa Quart says the buying and selling of American teens has gone too far. She's written a book called Branded, and she's here to talk about the commercialization of youth and ways to resist it. We do invite your questions, comments. Join us on 1-800-433-8850. Good morning, Alyssa. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning, Diane.
Tell me about when you first noticed this trend of marketing specifically toward teenagers.
I was just wandering around in a mall, and I had a revelation that kids had changed considerably from when I was a kid. They wore logos all over their clothes. They were incredibly self-conscious. Their bodies were bared into new extents. And when I talked to them, they spoke about feeling like they had to wear all these branded clothes or else.
Just keep up with the neighbors, as it were. I mean, the competition begins among the kids themselves, doesn't it?
It does. I mean, I as I argue in my book, it starts with corporate strategies and marketing, but it's reflected deeply within the kids' communities. Yes.
How far back does this whole idea of branding for teenagers go?
Well, teenagers have been a category since the beginning of World War II, at least, and the marketing to them is not a new phenomena, but the intensity with which they've been pursued and the way that they've been treated as a niche, especially tweens, the 9 to 14 category, has been intensified greatly in the last decade.
Now, is this because their families have more money than they have more money, or is it because the advertising campaigns have just become so intense that they find it hard to resist that kind of marketing?
Well, it's a combination of factors. I think parents who are boomers and may themselves be obsessed with sub-zero refrigerators and SUVs and so on, and perhaps work 2 jobs and some had single families, have a lot of guilt, and sometimes instead of giving their kids attention, they'll give them a DVD player or a new pair of sneakers. So that's one part, the parents' guilt, absence, and own interest in branded goods. The other part of this is indeed corporate strategies. The ad dollars spent on advertising to teens has multiplied by 20 times in the last decade or so.
Well, in fact, you came of age, in the 80s?
Yes.
And you began noticing all this stuff. Surely you were affected by it as well.
Yeah, and I mean, I write about that. There is this moment, I think, in every kid's life, no matter what era they came of age in, where it's almost a rite of passage, where you recognize, oh, I'm being judged by how I dress, how I look, what I wear, how affluent my family is. And, for me, I was 11 when I recognized that. For other kids, it's other ages.
But, I went to school in the 50s, high school in the 50s. It doesn't seem to me that we so much had brands as we had styles. For example, the black and white or brown and white Oxford shoes, the cashmere sweaters, the pleated skirts. I mean, there were no brand names on them, but we all sort of sought to find similarity with our classmates. And you're saying that now they're doing that through the branding process.
Yeah, definitely. That's the change. Branding, also how high end the uniforms that kids are wearing, to win one another over have become, how much more expensive the individual articles of clothing are. And also the sheer number of clothes that kids who I interviewed felt like they had to own a new outfit every day. So the shift is more about quantity, about luxury, and about brands.
And of course, you've got magazines now playing into this.
Yeah, the latest is Teen Vogue.
Teen Vogue.
Yeah.
Tell me about Teen Vogue.
Oh, it just launched, and it has the usual standbys. Boyfriends, girls talking about dealing with their weight problems, but it also has $300 shoes.
Lots of very expensive clothes.
Indeed, luxury
Sort of,
clothes.
you must have these.
Yeah, or just like lavish spreads, that do pay homage to the adult Vogue. And that's a real shift. I mean, even in the 80s, the only ads would be for Wet n Wild, which was the drugstore lipstick, and it wouldn't be for Chanel,
But Alyssa, it does seem to me that parents have to pay for such brands, and don't they put their feet down? Don't they say, this is going a little too far, gang? Or do they buy into this because the kids feel so strongly about it?
They buy into it because the kids feel strongly about it, but also I think because they themselves identify to some extent with the need for more and more and more of brand goods. So I think it's a two-pronged thing.
You're saying that the parents themselves are buying the Vuitton bags, they're buying the Chanel jackets, they're buying all these fancy goods, so they feel as though their kids are also entitled?
Yes, they feel like their kids are also entitled. And they probably feel, and some of the parents I spoke to said they felt, that it's not the worst thing. So if kids are going to act in an excessive way, better that they're, spending too much rather than, say, drinking too much.
I gather in addition to Teen Vogue, there's also Elle Girl. Is that correct?
Right.
And that's for teens. What about these so-called magalogs like Delia's?
Well, that's, to me, disturbing, and it's obviously not just in the teen sector, but this kind of combination of editorial and advertising that has proliferated in the teen market, so that you'll have very sort of poetical copy selling clothing, basically, to kids who, when I speak to them, don't necessarily recognize that this is an advertisement. And I think 13-year-olds and 12-year-olds don't necessarily know when they're reading a magazine or reading an advertisement, when it's at this point when they're so craftily meshed into one.
Give me an example. How does that work?
Oh, I don't know. It would be sort of prom wear, article that's actually a lengthy sort of advertisement kind of segment.
And it's actually a catalog for clothing.
Yeah.
And that's what they're seeing.
Yeah. They'd be seeing a clothing catalog, or vice versa. They'd be seeing a magazine that actually looks like a catalog.
Alyssa Quart, and her new book is called Branded, The Buying and Selling of Teenagers. If you'd like to join us, call us on 1-800-433-8850. We just got an email just before the show began this morning from David in Memphis, Tennessee, who says, recently I came across a website called Cool to Be Real for preteen girls. It's supposed to be about self-esteem and friendship, but is in fact a thinly cloaked advertorial meant to promote eating beef by girls. And apparently it's sponsored by the National Cattlemen's Beef Association and the Cattlemen's Beef Board. Have you seen that?
I haven't seen it, but I've heard about it recently also, and that is another example if we're talking about the blurring of the editorial and advertising lines for younger and younger kids. That'd be a perfect example.
So what they're doing is saying that this is for young girls, but once you're drawn in, they're talking about good food choices.
Yeah, that's right.
Keep your weight down.
Yeah.
Eat lots of
Yeah,
beef.
eat lots of beef.
That must make parents wonder a little bit about how their kids are making choices.
Yeah, I think it should.
The other trend that you identify is that companies use kids themselves as trend spotters. How do they do this?
Oh, they'll just have a call for volunteers, or they'll meet volunteers at malls, or they'll meet the parents of volunteers. Volunteers can be 13, they could be 17, or they have a call for them online, and then kids will basically join up and start plumping for whatever music label, band, clothier, website they've been.
But why would they do that? Why would kids say, well, sure, I'll wear your brand? Do they get that brand free of charge? Is that what happens?
Yes, they get it free of charge, but I think it's more ominous than that. I think it's like they identify so heavily with the brand, which is beyond just what normal kids at this point identify with the brand, which is I'm an Old Navy girl, I'm a Prada girl, I'm a Quicksilver boy. They're literally working for the brand. For free, of course, except they get the clothes, or they get the CDs, or they get the concert tickets, or what have you. So I think they want to be part of they see the brand as a star, and they want to be close to the star. It's like a celebrity.
Well, and speaking of stars, of course, we've seen all kinds of product placements in movies and on television, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and ever more so. And partially because adolescents don't watch as much television, actually, as they may be playing more video games. And the television they do watch, they're suspicious of conventional advertisements. So the new trend is to put a Nokia in the hand of a character on a reality show, to name one example, or a Coca-Cola moment, to have these moments of which are basically branded moments instead of actually being advertisements, branded moments within the television show or in the video game. There's video games based on Skittles, the candy.
Tell me about that.
It's called Darkened Sky, and the entire premise of the game is to collect the Skittles. Where I think it's a fairy princess in a dark land is trying to, the Skittles give her magical powers. There's also games involving, Big Macs and cell phones and Jeeps. And the Jeeps they're just placed there sort of, covertly, so that a kid will be playing over and over again. They keep seeing Jeep, Jeep, Jeep. And I think that's going to be the wave of the future, actually, that kind of placement in video games.
Alyssa, just for our listeners' sake, you have on a gray cardigan. Beneath it, you have on an off-white T-shirt. Are those branded items that you buy and think about very carefully?
Yes, I got these on sale. I did get them from a brand name store.
That's interesting. Alyssa Quart, her book is called Branded, The Buying and Selling of Teenagers. When we come back, we'll take your comments, questions. Join us on 1-800-433-8850. That's a very interesting trend. Really very interesting trend. Ah, yes.
What was...
Using teens in the commercials themselves, targeting. Is it Rabochi? Robachi, a robotic toy animal. Do you know anything about this?
I don't know.
For young children under 12.
Is there anything I should
Spalding?
just be?
Now that's interesting. Here's a woman who's taking issue with me. Okay.
Oh, okay. Good.
Yeah. And welcome back. Alyssa Quart is with me. If you've just joined us, we're talking about the ongoing phenomenon, and indeed many would say, as Alyssa does, that it's a growing phenomenon of branding, marketing specifically to teenagers who've got lots of expendable cash to spend. They're looking for particular brands because those brands are being marketed specifically to them. Here is an email from Jean, who says she loves the show, but she wants to disagree with me on brands for teens in the 1950s. You and I are about the same age, she says, and I still recall the brands de rigueur from high school and college, Spalding saddle shoes, Adler triple cuff socks, Jansen cashmere sweaters. Honest to goodness, I don't remember a single brand name. All I remember is the style of what we'd wear, and we'd all copy each other. Is that part of what's going on here?
Copying each other?
Sure.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, as we were discussing earlier, part of viral marketing, where viral means kids communicating to other kids, hey, this is a great new band, online at the behest of a music label, for instance. That kind of viral marketing can only happen because kids do copy each other. And if one kid says, hey, this band is great,
Sure.
and that's it's a natural process that marketers have now taken advantage of.
What about within the schools themselves? You've got a growing number of schools where, for example, Coke has bought a concession or Pepsi has bought a concession. So you see that branding going on even within the so-called safety of the schools.
Oh, yeah, I find that quite awful. There's a Rust-Oleum gym in Illinois named after the paint company. So, kids are playing field, hockey or kickball in a paint company gym. 10% of all schools have soda pouring contracts, as you just described, which means that Pepsi or Coke or some other bottler is the only company allowed to sell their sodas in the school.
But Alyssa, this sounds as though it's a flowing river, a mass ocean that cannot be stopped. Why are you calling such attention to it?
I think that there should be greater restrictions on corporate marketing to kids.
Like what?
For one thing, I think they need to disclose that their efforts are in fact marketing efforts, and that's not happening consistently.
To be very clear about those so-called magalogs, for example.
Not just the magalogs. There's companies that go into schools and collect information, personal information about kids within school hours, and then sell that information to cosmetics companies and credit card companies.
And are you saying that the schools are being reimbursed for getting that information?
Well, actually, in one instance, a company pretended to be a nonprofit, an educational nonprofit.
Oh, I see.
That was just a court case. And pretended to be an educational nonprofit, collected the information, and sold it to companies.
Where did that occur?
In New York, in New York State. And I feel like that, and there have been many other instances of that sort of, borderline activity. And I feel like full disclosure, disclosure of marketing techniques, publicly, so parents can know how their kids may be being marketed to, and just sort of a set of guidelines, really.
Do you think that would change anything? Do you think kids would perhaps buy fewer branded products if they knew the extent to which they are being manipulated, if you will?
I think perhaps that, but I also think if kids and parents spent some time per week looking at how advertisements are working upon them, looking at the video games, looking at MTV sort of imagery and discussing it, engaging in media criticism basically together, I think that would go a long way also, at least perhaps not to get kids to stop the tide of hyper-consumerism, but to stop it from entering their souls,
You also say that marketers are pushing adult products on adolescents. Give me an example.
Well, an example from my book was, I went to a bar mitzvah promotional event, and
A promotional event?
for party planners. So there'd be
I
sort of
see.
like a party planners
see.
promotional event. So there's hundreds of people, magicians, the usual kind of party stuff. But there was also a number of people putting on tattoos that said "sexy," and extremely kind of adult themed entertainments. Gyrating dancers and the like. And I felt like that was one example among many of the adultification of kids.
What about these so-called alco-pops?
Oh, that's a tricky issue because the alcohol distillers would never cop to selling to kids under 21. But there's something distinctly adolescent about these alcopops that they've been spending millions and millions in 2002 to sell. They're called things like Bodine's Twisted Tea. They look like Snapple. They're fruity, but they're alcohol.
But they can't be sold over the counter to kids. They can only be sold to adults. But you're saying the packaging, the presentation makes it look attractive and available to kids.
Exactly.
So there's a lot of line crossing going on.
That's right. And I think that that's one thing that I've tried to highlight in my book. It's a sort of twilight territory here. It's often...
All right, we've got lots of callers, so let's open the phones now. If you'll put those headphones on, 1-800-433-8850. Let's go first to Alexandria, Virginia. Good morning, Laurie.
Good morning. I just wanted to make a quick comment.
Sure.
Which is that it's not just the brand names, it's also the accumulation of stuff. I mean, from the time these kids are infants, if they get a Happy Meal at McDonald's, they get a toy. If they go to a birthday party, they get a party favor bag. Everything nowadays is connected to some piece of merchandise. And as hard as I have tried as a parent, and I have a 9-year-old and a 12-year-old now, the amount of stuff that they accumulate from other sources and the marketing that goes on is unbelievable. And I often joke that if we ever had a nuclear war, the one thing that would survive are plastic McDonald's toys.
Oh, dear.
I mean, it is just a phenomenal, the amount of marketing for more and more stuff.
Alyssa, that begins, as Laurie is saying, really quite young.
Oh, yeah, it's a cradle to grave marketing at this point. Almost before kids can talk, they're already being targeted.
Well, parents have an uphill battle here, but they're not helpless.
No, I mean, as I was saying, you can try to lift the curtain with your kids.
Sure. All right, to Cleveland, Ohio. Good morning, David. You're on the air.
Good morning.
Hi.
I have 3 kids. My oldest is an 11-year-old girl, and I absolutely agree that marketing towards kids has really become a challenge for parents. I think there's always been communication between businesses and kids, and it's changed over the last generation or two, just the way all other communication has changed. There's a lot more of it. It's ubiquitous. I mean, it's all over the place. But our own behavior is really the driver. The first words out of your guest's mouth were, well, the thought occurred to me while I was walking through the mall. Well, that was a choice. Recreational shopping and recreational consumption is a byproduct of, this fabulous wealth that we have in our country. But it's not an obligation. There's plenty of other things that you can do with your kids and teach your kids that aren't consumption focused. Every day at school, my kids have the choice to buy a candy bar. I choose as their parent not to let them. It's not that they can't have candy or other treats, but in order to teach them how to handle that decision-making about money responsibly, you got to introduce some restrictions when they're kids and gradually offer them more freedom as they demonstrate the ability to make smart decisions.
Alyssa.
I mean, it sounds like you're a really good parent. I don't think that many parents can have the time or the wherewithal, though, to make sure that their kids are having the proper restrictions and freedoms at the right points in their lives.
David, do you think you're unusual?
I'm 40 years old and I have 0 credit card debt. Okay? I have friends who are people who I respect, who have very similar values to me, who have significant credit card debt. The difference is how we were specifically taught how to use it. And it's a skill set that I agree a generation or two ago you probably didn't need, and it probably wasn't as important, if you did need it. Just like, the communication skills that we need today are different.
Sure.
And I think that it's unrealistic for us as parents to say, well, society has to fix this, the schools or the marketing. No, we have to do it as parents.
He's very passionate.
Yeah, very passionate.
And he's right. I mean, to a large extent, that it does come down to the relationship between the parent and child, the instruction the child receives not only through what the parent says, but how the parent uses money. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh, definitely. But the fastest growing group filing for bankruptcy are those under 25.
I was astonished to read that in your book. How can that be, Alyssa?
Partially, I think, because credit card companies are targeting kids, college-age kids and younger. And also, as the last 2 callers have said, this intense accumulation, drive to market to kids has changed the skill set that kids need, and they don't necessarily have that skill set. They don't know how to navigate it.
But again, do credit cards given to kids who are 18 and above, don't they have to be co-signed by a parent, or can they simply be issued?
I think there are definitely issues with that, although a number of credit card companies have come out with cards like the Visa Bucks card, cards that are aimed at kids. And something like 12% of kids have their own credit cards.
Extraordinary. At 25 before the hour, you're listening to the Diane Rehm Show. And we'll go to Royal Oak, Michigan. Good morning, Walt.
Oh, thanks, Diane.
Sure.
I have a comment and a question at
Certainly.
the end. I would say that maybe the young people are no more vulnerable than older people, and style-based clothes or other items. Overcoming the significance of content. We who are a little bit older might, think that, a dark suit and a blue tie might lend more credibility to an argument than, somebody with purple hair and a bone in their nose, or, somebody in a lab coat being able to make a subject, torture somebody in a box because, it's okay, figure of authority. But now the same thing, using style to convince young people that they're rad when actually they're being more homogenized into the, clothes culture or that sort of thing. It's kind of the same mechanism. But and my question is, what does this, as far as globalizing this to the whole world, is this really the face that we want to present for, being the main thing that people overseas see of America?
Sure. And it is being spread across the world, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. It's most intense in the U.S., but other countries are following in our wake.
Aren't there some trends, however, in this very vein that have begun in Europe? That in London, for example, or Paris, where some of these fashion trends begin, the acquisition or the desire for acquisition may get to the U.S., but the fashion trend itself, the marketing, begins in Europe.
Yeah, I just heard about some London PR firm that was tattooing logos on people's foreheads. Not permanent logos, but so that would be a form of advertising.
Logos on foreheads.
Yeah. So obviously, it's all over the world at this point.
You also write of something of an inversion of the youth cult explosion of 30 years ago, and how this is affecting kids.
Yeah, the youth cult was definitely sort of a desirable, youth was a desirable identity in the 60s. And now, at this point, kids want to look like adults. The toy manufacturers of America used to sell toys to 14 and under. Now it's 10 and under. So when a kid is 10 or 11, they're already aspiring to be an adolescent or adult character on Sex and the City. So it's a real reversal.
And now the adults are trying to look more like kids as well, aren't they?
Yeah. So I, as I write in my book, they meet in between. A mom will try to look like her daughter, and a daughter will try to look like her mom.
That's too bad.
Yeah, it's an odd thing.
It's an odd thing. Do you think girls are more affected than boys?
Probably by that, yes. As there's a number of things in which boys are, I feel that marketing and branding and the commodity culture has affected boys, their body images for one thing. As I was saying, video games, extreme sports, it's other areas.
Yeah, of course, there is that rather blatant example of the young man, the high school basketball player, who decided to take two jerseys that were offered to him by a particular store, as long as the store was able to take photographs of him. And he's now been suspended by a couple of games. His mother took out a loan to buy him a Hummer, a $150,000 loan to buy her son a Hummer based on his future earnings. So these T-shirts at $385 or whatever seem like small change, but this kind of branding goes on all the time. And athletes are definitely up there as far as carrying that brand. We'll take just a short break here. When we come back, we've got tons of calls. We'll try to get to all of them before the top of the hour. Stay with us. Oh, here's a caller, a fellow who produces television commercials. He says the parents are at fault. Teens and preteens. Real?
This is interesting. This I thought was really interesting.
Oh, this is extraordinary.
This is interesting. This is interesting.
Well, and I was going to get to this with her anyhow. Okay.
And then that kind of goes with what you were talking about in Europe. They're saying, this is another said that in Europe there are classes, and that goes to that
on the web at www.ford.org.
Yeah.
This is NPR, National Public Radio.
Okay.
car companies, and
Yeah.
then these are
Getaway
all
for summer
from
vacation.
parents.
It's supposed
Dear
I mean, there's so
heaven.
many, but parents who have found
So what does it
ways
say
of
if
talking
you're
to
still
their kids
preoccupied?
Good.
and look for sales, and you know,
Good.
what can parents
How do
do?
you talk to your kids
Yeah,
that's
about this stuff?
good.
And
Yeah.
there are so many more.
I just had to read out a few.
But we've got to get to these calls as
Yeah.
well. Yeah. One person, Alyssa, wants to know if you've met any of the people behind these marketing ploys and what they have said to you. And I think that's a good question. We've got one on the line who says he produces television commercials. So we'll go to him next. Just know that at the end I have to run across the hall very quickly. So I'll have to, at the end of the show, I'll have to run across the hall very quickly.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
I don't want you to think I'm rude, but I have to. Okay. Okay. All right. And our next caller is in Miami, Florida. Good morning, Miriam. You're on the air.
Hi there. I'm a person that considers myself to be part of the problem in a way because I'm in the media. I'm a commercials producer. So we are constantly being given a lot of information by advertising agencies as to the latest brands, what kids want, all the marketing statistics that support the growth of the buying power of kids. But to me, it's not so much the buying power as it is the manipulative power, because we're constantly being told that kids feel they need this, they need that, and therefore they're manipulating their parents into buying these things. So, which leads me to my other comment, and you touched upon it earlier when you said it would be nice if the parents took time to speak to their children and really analyze the media that they're seeing. But of course, that would imply that parents really are going to spend time analyzing these
Sure.
things. And what I'm finding, literally, because all our focus groups tell us, is that parents spend less and less time. They pretty much give in and say, hey, you want to look like Britney Spears and you want these things? Go for it. Get it. And to me, that is just really noticeable in this generation above anything else. So it's I've seen the growth of it through my career, but this generation is extremely susceptible to this, which tells me that this generation of parents is not spending the time to really talk to their child and also tell the child, hey, you're okay. You don't need to have these things.
Well, let me reassure you, Miriam, we've gotten lots of emails from parents who are saying, this is how I'm handling it, this is how I'm dealing with the problem. So clearly there are a lot of people out there who are trying to, what's your advice as to the best way, Alyssa, that parents should deal with this question?
Well, as I said, discuss media to them, commercial media with them, talk about their feelings about it. Parents should be doing this with their kids. Another practice is the counter ad, where kids learn how to create an anti-ad ad, or that's a way of just learning media literacy from inside. Like, oh, this is how an advertisement or a billboard works by making one. That's been pretty effective in sort of the anti-smoking campaigns, where kids have made kind of anti-smoking advertisements.
I see. Now, what about kids who totally resist this kind of branding? Did you talk with them as well?
Yeah, I talked with dozens of them, actually, and I found them pretty moving, actually. There's a number of different ways in which kids are expressing those impulses.
How?
Some of them are through kind of typical activism, rallies. Some of them from more sort of new imaginative forms of activism, like subvertising, which is an example of subvertising would be to change the Nike Presto sign into not Impresto, and it's sort of the equivalent of drawing the mustache on the ad for an ad for a shampoo ad on a model's face.
But do they try to draw attention, for example, to their own non-branded clothes.
Yeah, they do, definitely. When you ask them where they shop, they'll say Goodwill, Salvation Army, very proudly. So, in a way that just fits in with a lot of, as I write in my book, kind of maverick identities that kids have always had.
Yeah, kids have always had, and I was just thinking of my husband who went to Friends Seminary in New York back in the 40s, and there were a lot of quite wealthy young people there. But he and his group of male friends all decided that they were going to wear the oldest clothes they had to school every single day. And before long, the entire class had done the same thing. I mean, his family didn't have any money, but he was going to school with a lot of kids who did, who could afford that sort of thing. So it does seem to me the parents can have a certain amount of impact, but the kids themselves can do a lot more.
Yeah, kids can do a lot more in a certain way. They can certainly talk to one another, which I was moved by also, just the ways that kids were communicating with one another. I went to this one school in Maine and went to a kind of anti-corporate school play where kids had put on a play that was criticizing advertising and
within the school.
Within the school.
Uh-huh.
And I talked to them, and it seemed like they had conversations frequently about body image, about the way they were being sort of marketed to so aggressively, and how they were negotiating it. And those conversations with one another had really helped them.
1-800-433-8850 to Holly in Salt Lake City. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Diane and Alyssa. Thank you for taking my call.
Certainly.
I find this topic so intriguing, and quickly, just a couple of quick comments. Sure. I actually write a column for the Salt Lake Tribune here, the morning newspaper, and have used my own two children, the 14-and-a-half and 12-year-old, as lab rats. Frequently, this topic, I've touched on this a little bit, but two quick things, if I may. One thing that I found very interesting about 3 years ago, my husband and I were divorced, and boy, if that didn't sort of swing me around quickly to realizing that I didn't have a big choice about buying my children every brand and,
sure.
and everything else. So, I think we've talked a lot about that in the last couple of years without getting obsessive about money. I've been very clear with them. We've talked a lot about needs versus wants and that kind of thing.
Good for you.
Yeah, and the other thing is my own daughter, she's a freshman in high school, and she and her close circle of friends, 3 or 4 girls, have worked very hard in the last, I'd say, 6 months or so, kind of doing an anti-branding effort, which ties into what you were talking about a couple of minutes ago, what teenagers are doing maybe to fight all of this. They almost exclusively, we do buy brands periodically, but they almost exclusively shop at flea markets and vintage stores and Goodwill, and they do a lot to sort of develop this little trend in their group of friends of buying the old stuff.
They're going to establish their own non-branding brand. That's
it's
clear.
So much fun. It's so much fun. And, when she comes home from a little shopping spree, we talk about it, and we just feel so much better that she bought 5 outfits for $50 rather than one outfit for $100.
Exactly, and probably lots of young people out there are doing exactly that. At 10 minutes before the hour, you're listening to The Diane Rehm Show. And thanks so much for calling. Let's go now to Paw Paw, Michigan. Good morning, Suzanne.
Good morning. I guess I have a couple of comments. First, everybody is touching on so many wonderful points. My husband and I were married very young, and our children are 21 and 19, so we went through the tween thing. But I look back in the 70s when we were growing up, and we didn't have 25 or 50 channels of television. We didn't have 10 magazines that were focused on us like the kids do now. We didn't have Nintendo and a lot of the other things that they do have. And
we had comic books. I think that was about it. Sure.
And like one of the last caller just stated, it was a joke at our house. It was called a need because we had to decide if it was a want or a need, and they would save money or they would put things on layaway, which nobody does anymore because stores don't allow you to do that. You either put it on credit or you wait until you save the money.
Sure. I haven't heard that word layaway in so long, Alyssa.
Yeah, I haven't either.
Yeah.
No, and our son now lives in New York City. He does go to the vintage stores, which I've been told you don't call Goodwill anymore. It's a vintage store. And our daughter is in college, and yeah, she does buy some brand name stuff, but she also goes to the vintage stores, and she really likes them, and both of them do. He's been doing that since he was 14.
That's terrific. Well, good for you, Suzanne. I'm sure you've given some other people some great ideas. Thanks for calling. Let's go to Cleveland, Ohio. Hi, Ryan. You're on the air.
Hi, Diane. I just have a couple quick points.
Sure.
I'm in that bracket I was born in '79, and my parents didn't really let me or my brothers get exposed too much to any of the mass stuff, and none of us really have any care about any brand names. My brothers are both into the thrift store thing, but my point is that it seems like there's a fear of brand X that's out today that nobody really. They don't want to buy something that's unknown. Like when I when I want a sandwich, I don't go to a Subway. I would go to a sub shop, down the street. That's not a major chain. But a lot of people don't want to do that because they don't want to. They've seen all the commercials that you've tried the other brand, but this is the name brand. This is the one you want, and it's pretty much what I was wanting to say.
Good. I'm glad you said it. But do you think in the young people to whom you talked that there is a growing segment of that population that's really deliberately seeking out non-brand names or going to a sub shop instead of a Subway?
I hope so. I really
hope
so.
Yeah, that's one way to put it.
Yeah. I find it heartening, these calls, especially the last one. Yeah.
I should say. All right, and to Dover, New Hampshire. Hi, Michelle.
Hi. I have 3 kids, my oldest of which is 5, and already I'm having trouble finding age-appropriate clothing for my daughter. Everything has sexy across the top, or they're halters, or they don't come down far enough, and it's really frustrating. You'd expect that at the more trendy stores, but the regular department stores, we have that problem now. And the other thing that we're doing to try to just calm things down is my daughter has a birthday party this Sunday, and instead of gifts, she was given the opportunity to invite all her class or no gifts. And she chose to invite all her class.
Good for her.
Yeah, pretty smart kid.
Yeah, I like it. But your point about finding age-appropriate clothes for 5-year-olds is really a good one. I've walked through department stores and clothing shops. Unless you go to a true children's clothing shop, you see, exactly as you said, all of these sort of, sexy, provocative clothes for a 5-year-old girl, which I just find really strange. Have you seen that as well, Alyssa?
Yeah, I mean, certainly, especially Abercrombie and Fitch, the thongs that are aimed at the preteen set. And they have, I believe, eye candy and wink wink on them. And, or like I remember the porn star T-shirts that were popular maybe 2 or 3 years ago that were also for preteens. And I guess I don't want to make an argument that adolescents should not be interested in sex, not sexually active. I don't agree with that at all. But I think to think of themselves as sex objects when they're 12 is troubling, to say the least.
And that is what clothing can do, after all. All right, we've got time for one last caller. Let's go to Miami, Florida, and to Bruce. Good morning to you.
Hi, good morning. 2 quick questions.
Very quick, please.
Very quick. One is this whole conversation is part of the reason why I'm a big advocate of school uniform programs. And secondly, I think a lot of the topics that you've touched on today are really part of a diabolical, if I'll use that word, marketing that's tied into why people are so against the whole globalization idea. I'll leave those 2 with you and take my response.
All right. Thanks for calling. What do you think about school uniforms, Alyssa?
I guess I don't think it addresses the problem. I can see the use of having school uniforms within school, but in a sense, I think it creates a forbidden fruit of brands, and it's not enough. I mean, it's not helping kids work through their desires, that whole needing, wanting problem.
What about his point that really it's all connected to this larger problem of globalization and marketing to different countries and translating our standards of ethics and our standards of what's beauty and what's effective to other cultures that in some ways have come to resent us?
Oh, I think indeed. And I mean, Americana itself is something of a brand.
And that's the last word from Melissa Quart. Her new book is called Branded: The Buying and Selling of Teenagers. Thanks so much for doing this work and for being here.
Oh, you're so welcome.
And thanks to our listeners. I'm Diane Rehm.
The Diane Rehm Show is produced by Sandra Pinkert, Elizabeth Terry, and Ed.
Alyssa Quart is author of Branded: The Buying and Selling of Teenagers. It's published by Perseus on the web at perseuspublishing.com.